Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. Have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. It's time. I pledge to every citizen of our land that I will be president for all Americans, and this is so important to me. For those who have chosen not to support me in the past, of which there were a few people, I'm reaching out to you for your guidance and your help so that we can work together and unify our great country. As I've said from the beginning, ours was not a campaign, but rather an incredible and great movement made up of millions of hardworking men and women who love their country and want a better, brighter future for themselves and for their family.
Major Garrett is in Washington. He's our CBS News chief White House correspondent and covered Mr. Trump's campaign since the very start. Here with me in New York, CBS This Morning Saturday host Alex Wagner. Welcome to you both. Major, let's begin with you. That's what the president-elect said the night of his victory. What are you going to be listening for at his inauguration?
You know, Elaine, I will be as much listening as I will be watching. I think a very important and fascinating aspect of this inaugural address from Donald Trump, who will be our 45th president, is not just what he says, but how he says it. How does he look in dealing with the awesome responsibilities that will really begin, and I've talked to former presidents about this, they wash over you as you walk out onto the west front of the United States Capitol and prepare to take the inaugural address, because that's when it all gets very, very real. And there is this aspect of Donald Trump that served him well throughout the campaign. A very big personality, big, broad shoulders, strong man. All of that comes across without any real effort on his part. And yet the presidency itself is so much bigger than any persona, even one as large as Donald Trump. So I'll be looking for rhetoric that's very similar to what he said in the early morning hours of November 9th, after Hillary Clinton conceded defeat, talking about unity, talking about how he's a different kind of political actor and that he wants to bring people into politics who've become estranged from it, who believe Washington has almost become a hostile force in their lives. All of those sorts of things that you would expect a change agent candidate to talk about. But I'll be as much looking at his overall sense of the moment, sense of himself, and lastly, how does he place himself? And this is really one of the great challenges of every inaugural address. How does the president place himself in the tide of American history? And the ability or the inability of President Trump, soon to be, to do that will be a key part of the success or lack of success of his inaugural address.
Yeah, Alex, what about you? What is it that you're going to be not just listening for, but as Major points out, watching for on inaugural day?
You know, we've been told it's not going to be a long speech. We've heard it could be 20 minutes or thereabout, which is relatively short for an inaugural, and that it will be Jacksonian in nature. So I think there will be a hefty dose of populism, Elaine. What I do expect is you'll hear, a defiant and enthused Donald Trump. I'm sure we will hear the words greatness and America several times over. But I do think, to Major's point, that like election night, magnanimity is sort of the order of the day. And there will be an attempt to bind the wounds, as it were, and reach out to those who perhaps didn't vote for him. Given, though, that this is Donald Trump, the overriding sentiment I think we're going to hear is defiant, enthused, excited populism.
Right. So on that note, Alex, Mr. Trump was asked recently about the celebrities not necessarily coming out in abundance for his inauguration and appearing. And what he essentially said was, quote, "I don't want the celebrities, I want the people." So isn't it fair, based on what you just pointed out about what we understand will be the tone of his speech, that the usual metrics here just don't apply? That the typical track trappings, that the typical trappings that
Sure.
we've used to observe inaugurations in the past are not going to be what, especially his supporters, are going to be watching.
Sure. I think in all fairness, Donald Trump's sort of, we'll call it spin on the inaugural festivities is very much making lemonade out of lemons, given the fact that this is someone who throughout his life has been very preoccupied with celebrity and the gilded world of the A-list. Having said that, it is very much on message to say, I want the people, and it very much fits with the candidate he was for the last 2 years. So in that way, I'm sure it'll work for him. I think, for Donald Trump supporters, there is no bigger celebrity than Donald Trump. He will be there, and that will make them happy.
Yeah, Major, what do you think about that? I mean, in a way, doesn't it just sort of boost the perception of him, Major, the way he wants to cast himself as an everyman, as opposed to being a wealthy celebrity?
Well, let me draw upon my experience on the road for 16 months covering this campaign and say this. Those people who show up in Washington and those who don't have the money but would give anything to be in Washington to watch this inauguration are part of this movement that Donald Trump talked about. And I'm relatively confident that when local television stations interview people who are either leaving their local communities to go to the inauguration or they cover them there, we're going to see and hear about stories of people who have saved up lots of their extra dollars and taken their slenderly available vacation time for this moment because it means so much to them symbolically. I met dozens, if not hundreds, of Trump supporters who, as I mentioned earlier, were not just estranged from politics, but had largely given up on the political process. And something Donald Trump said to them or said about the country or the direction he was pointing resonated with them. And I suspect a lot of people who will come to this inauguration are not the ones who've come to previous inaugurations, not the well-heeled supporters of either a Democratic president or a Republican president, but people who are re-engaged in politics, maybe for the first time ever, maybe for the first time in a long time. And whatever celebrity component does or doesn't exist, I really do think that will be the essence of the Trumpian inauguration and the Trumpian experience. And it will be up to him and his administration to continue to harness and speak to and serve that movement and that constituency. And if it does, it has a good chance of succeeding, at least politically. If it does not, the political world can be just as cruel to him as he was to it in his rise to the presidency.
I would just add to what Major's saying. I mean, I think there's a difference between the celebrities we talk about going to the inauguration and the people going to the actual inauguration. And on that count, when you talk about populism, remember 2008, where the National Mall was packed with hundreds of thousands, in the millions, people wanting to see that moment. It will be very interesting to see how 2017 compares to 2009.
Right. So, Major, I want to put up a photo now of Mr. Trump. He posted this Wednesday. This is as he was working on his speech. And you can see the caption there, writing my inaugural address at the Winter White House, Mar-a-Lago, 3 weeks ago, looking forward to Friday. Now, historically, Major, as you know, inaugural addresses signal what an administration hopes to accomplish. This is a president, though, who has signaled a lot of different things via Twitter, everything from foreign policy to his views on Meryl Streep. How do you think that will factor in? And also, do you have any insight into his process for writing this speech?
Well, look, let's take a look at that picture one more time. I do think there is something that's kind of comically designed to be a send-up with that picture. I mean, look, it's a legal pad. You can tell by the placement of his hands. He may be 2 or 3 sentences into the draft. There's not a single page turned over.
Maybe it's just that short, Major.
I mean, maybe about right there. I think he's saying, and I'd like to thank Senator Mitch McConnell, and et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I do think there is something a little bit comical and kind of a send-up about that picture.
Yeah.
And the process is as it is for most incoming presidents. There's a staff speechwriter. In the case of Donald Trump and his transition team, it's his policy director, Stephen Miller, who worked for years on Capitol Hill for Jeff Sessions, the nominee to become Attorney General, and a central figure both in the policy approaches of the Trump campaign, the Trump transition, and soon to be Trump White House, and the speechwriter who puts together the first draft for Donald Trump. That was the person who put together the draft for the inauguration address. Jared Kushner is also a partner in this process. He was central to a couple of the set-piece speeches that candidate Trump gave during the campaign. Kellyanne Conway, Steve Bannon, Reince Priebus, all are participating. But look, let's not kid ourselves. Every inaugural address is about the president who gives it. And yes, historians at some point really go into the weeds about who wrote each and every phrase, but inaugural addresses, unlike almost anything else the president said, is owned entirely by the president. The drafting process, whatever, in the end, whatever the president decides to say and leave out is what is remembered by history. So this is Donald Trump's speech. The process is not altogether different. Will he be as actively involved as a writer, as a composer of the lyrical words, should there be any, as let's say President Obama was? Clearly not. But as Donald Trump has said many times about himself, and all those in the transition repeatedly say, he's not about rhetoric, he's not about words, he's about actions. So I think, to Alex's point, you're going to hear action-oriented words in this inaugural address, very much directed toward what he believes the audience will interpret as populism, because that is an ever-shifting, largely undefined concept in American politics. Populism is what you tell people it is and what they accept that it is. It doesn't have a classical definition. And certainly, Donald Trump is not Andrew Jackson reincarnated in a Republican or neo-Republican image. So it's going to be his rhetoric, his populist approach, but action-oriented, and set some lofty goals for the country, in addition to the familiar calls and requests for unity.
All right, Alex, you mentioned a moment ago 2009. I want to go back now to President Obama's first inaugural address in 2009. Here's a bit of that.
On this day, we gather because we have chosen hope over fear, unity of purpose over conflict and discord. On this day, we come to proclaim an end to the petty grievances and false promises, the recriminations and worn-out dogmas that for far too long have strangled our politics. We remain a young nation, but in the words of Scripture, the time has come to set aside childish things. The time has come to reaffirm our enduring spirit, to choose our better history, to carry forward that precious gift, that noble idea passed on from generation to generation, the God-given promise that all are equal, all are free, and all deserve a chance to pursue their full measure of happiness.
All right, so Alex, like you said off camera a moment ago, it's a lot easier to look back in hindsight.
Yeah.
That was the tone that President Obama tried to set. As we know, during his presidency, partisan rancor just really increased, and now you have a very polarized, divided nation. We can debate who's at fault for that. But what I want to know is, for Mr. Trump, on Friday, how much of an opportunity do you think there will be to try and reach out to those people who did not support him?
Look, I think it's a huge opportunity. It is in some ways a really tough bill to fill, given, as you point out, Elaine, the divisions, the fact that the very next day there will be a march in protest of the man who's been inaugurated as the 45th president of the United States. But listening to President Obama there, his sort of soaring oratory is very much unique to that president. But there's a point in that speech where he repeats the phrase, "on this day," which is very much a sort of flag planting, a sense that the axis has turned. And I think that is a spirit that Donald Trump will try and take as well, which is to say, the country is changed, it is changing, we are representative of a changing America. And in many ways, I think that that's correct. The division between the Obama administration and the incoming Trump administration would appear to be a deep one. That kind of flag planting, I think, will be important for his supporters. Now, the question is, how do you pivot from a sort of doubling down on the thing that brought him into office and also convey a spirit of magnanimity and a sense that he will work across the aisle? That is the TBD, and that's why it's hard.
Yeah, Major, what do you think about that very quickly here in the last minute that we have left?
Well, it's a big goal for President Trump in this inaugural address to reshape his own image, which is hard to do because he spent so much time in his career and his campaign shaping it in a certain way. And he has to adapt to the realities of the presidency, which calls upon him to at least address the concerns, if not respond to each and every concern of the entire country. And his inaugural address, as Alex indicated, is an opportunity to begin that conversation. But as I know from covering 3 presidents, that conversation is a continuous one, and how you handle it after your inaugural address is just as important as the address itself.
All right, Major Garrett and Alex Wagner, stick around, please. We're going to be talking to you again later this hour.